You don't know me and we'll never meet. I had a problem like you once. I drank and used to party a little too much till it got out of control and almost ruined my life. I realized I needed help to fix my problem before it totally destroyed me. If you've tried to fix your drinking and drug problem and you know you can't do it alone, you need to call the National Treatment Advisors. They'll immerse you into a 30-day program to replace your old habits with new habits and totally change your life. And if you have PPO private health insurance, the entire program may be covered. Fix your problem right now before it gets any worse. Get clean. Call now and learn more. 877-247-1581. 877-247-1581. 877-247-1581.
Attention all business owners and creative minds. Do you need a unique and personalized touch for your products? Look no further than Romika Laser Engraving and Custom Designs. I'm Ron Phillips, co-owner of Romika Designs. We offer custom laser engraving services for a variety of products, including promotional items and corporate or personal gifts. With state-of-the-art equipment and a team of skilled designers, we can engrave intricate designs on virtually any material. Whether it's a special message, a company logo, or a custom design, Romika Laser Engraving will help you make your mark. And the best part, our prices are affordable and our turnaround time is quick.
I couldn't be happier with the work Romika Laser Engraving did for me. The engraving on my product was precise and exactly what I wanted.
So don't wait any longer to add a personal touch to your products. Call Romika Laser Engraving and Custom Designs today at 817-400-4040 or visit our website at romikadesigns.com. We look forward to helping you make your mark.
Fast Track Student Loans can get your student loans out of default, stop any wage garnishments, stop collection calls, and stop seizure of your tax refund. Give yourself a break. Stop the stress and get your student loan payments down to as little as $25 a month based on what you can afford to pay. 800-709-4395, 800-709-4395, 800-709-4395, 800-709-4395.
Hey travelers, do you want to save money on your next flight? Then pick up the phone and call. That's right, call, because the best prices are not online. They're with SmartFares. See, SmartFares has special deals with the airlines. When they have unsold seats, they use SmartFares to fill them. So you get airline tickets at ridiculously low prices. Our prices are too low to publish online. With the extra money you'll save, you can book another trip or treat yourself to dinner or shopping. So stop searching all of those travel sites to find the lowest price on your next flight. Let one of our SmartFares expert travel agents find ridiculously low prices for you. Call SmartFares today and get the best price on your next flight. Guaranteed. Also, save up to 50% off business and first class tickets.
855-325-1820. 855-325-1820. That's 855-325-1820.
Fast Track Student Loans can get your student loans out of default, stop any wage garnishments, stop collection calls, and stop seizure of your tax refund. Give yourself a break. Stop the stress and get your student loan payments down to as little as $25 a month based on what you can afford to pay. 800-709-4395, 800-709-4395, 800-709-4395, 800-709-4395.
You're listening to Joco Community Radio.
Good afternoon, Johnson County. Welcome back to Let Freedom Ring. I'm your host, Jake Wernette. We are blessed by God on this wonderful Tuesday afternoon to have such a nice, cool day and a break from the record heat of this past summer to now enjoying 2 weeks we get a fall before -1 degrees rolls back around. Today's show, we're going to cover a few topics. Many will notice that my good friend and co-host Mick is not in the room today. He is assisting a local candidate with a few things, helping him run a small business style campaign for Congress. I want to real quick shout out, just as I would for any candidate in this coming race, that Mr. Matthew Lucci today started in local news his 12-day Take Our Country Back tour for this month. That entails these next 2 weeks, week and a half. He will be going around several cities around the Metroplex, around the 25th Congressional District, and will be sort of meeting with different types of groups, lawmakers. Today, he went and spoke at Steam Middle School and had discussed the fentanyl crisis with students, what they can do to stay aware of what's going on, to not trust taking drugs from any friends, anything that looks off. Spoke to educators at the local middle school and had put out a few Facebook posts from that. Our job here is not to really push one side of the narrative. I would speak the same if a Democrat, if Roger Williams or somebody was in the area and doing a tour, because I feel like it's imperative as local citizens that we really look at what our congressional candidates are doing, and we start to get a guise for what kind of person they are, what kind of character they have, and especially the way things are going in this country now, that we hold them accountable for the things that they do wrong, and credit them for the things that they do good according to the will of us and the American public. So today we're going to start off with something a little out of the ordinary that seems like it happened overnight this weekend. The deranged attack from Hamas on the state of Israel. Now, I will put out there ahead of time that I am a Christian. I grew up learning about Israel and its imperativeness with Christianity. I learned about all of the doctrines of Christianity having to do with our brothers and sisters in Judaism. But my goal here is not to push state propaganda. My goal is not to do anything but inform the American public based on what is going on and give my prerogative on it. So this first article comes from the Associated Press. What to know on the fourth day of the latest Israeli-Palestinian war. Now, we did not call it a war until Netanyahu had come out and the prime minister's office had come out and said that they are in a war. And so Western media quickly adopted the narrative that this is something that we haven't seen before. But what we really lack, those who without the religious perspective, is Israel has been at war since it was created. And I'm not talking about the agreement with the United Nations and all of these other countries in 1945 to give the land and recognize the state of Israel as a sovereign country. I'm talking about we go back way longer into the Abrahamic traditions before the state of Israel was ever called the state of Israel, back when its capital was Jerusalem for the first few thousand years of Judaism's history in the region. So this is really nothing new that we've seen ever since the sons of Abraham themselves were born. This has been going on. Ishmael and the offspring of Abraham. This has been happening many more years than what the media wants people to believe. So it came as a surprise, though, when we started seeing such heinous acts being committed. We saw 5,000 rockets being fired over the skies of Israel back on the 7th, shortly before our weekend started. And so Israel really was scrambling to get stuff ready. They have the Iron Dome systems activated, which 24/7 these things are on alert. They triangulate things within the cities and shoot down mortars, rockets, artillery fire. But the barrage that they had seen, there was no capability like it before, from what I have understood about the accounts of the attack. And I am evidently going to express that I am on the side of Israel, and that is not just to say it as a religious perspective, but for a entirely a different reason. Hamas is registered as a terror organization for one reason and one reason only. It is not because they are pro-Palestine. It is not because they are Islamic. It is because they use terror tactics to enforce the doctrines of what they believe, and that is whether you look at it as religious extremism or ideological extremism. any group, in my interpretation, whether it's Christian, Muslim, Hindu, any one of these sects that use criminal tactics, anti-Geneva Convention methods, unconventional warfare on citizens, taking hostages, is nothing short of a terrorist organization. And I support anybody who's going after these groups, because we can't sit here as Christians, we can't sit here as Muslims, whatever you are, and say that we have a value for human life when we are not taking the side of somebody who is wanting to go after somebody who evidently has no credibility for human life. And so that's really what we're seeing here, is a group that has no remorse, that has no backing for human life, but they do have a pretty strong backing, which is coming out as Iran in this time. Now, Iran is nothing short of a powder keg in the region. It wants to be a regional superpower. It doesn't have the GDP, doesn't have the economy, it doesn't have the military backing to really become a superpower as the United States or Russia or communist China would. So what we're seeing is Iran is using puppet states, puppet groups in the region to really enforce their own doctrine of the state of Iran. Now, whether this is true or not, I am not sure at the moment. And I say that in the best of intent, because we do need a thorough investigation of where the alleged $6 billion of our taxpayer money went when it went to Iran. Why are we funding states that hate us? As Senator John Neely Kennedy, a Republican from the great state of Louisiana, had said, why are we paying people to hate us? They should be able to hate us for free. So my question is where is the serious investigation going to begin into where the finances came from, where the weapons came from, and until we can get into backing Israel the way that they demand, what is our Congress going to do about setting a serious, balanced budget analysis over the United States? And I am not for sending a war cache anywhere. I'm not for sending war stock anywhere. But we seriously can't be expected to take up our allies when we can't even take care of our own budget. When the United States is sending $140 billion with no oversight, with little prerogative, with little regulation, to a country that most of us who are not regular maps cartographers cannot find. I'm being serious. There was a study done where they asked them to find Ukraine on a map. Most people pointed to Canada. 5 people pointed to the United States. I wouldn't be surprised if one of them was Joe Biden and the other 4 were our congressional leaders. So they're really putting troops at our border seriously. They're putting them 3,000 miles away where they don't even have the will to remember. And this isn't anything short of a very serious need of an investigation. There was something that occurred back in the 60s, I believe. It was called the Naval affair, where Israel had actually put foreign agents into Egypt under the guise of them being Egyptian communists and supported by the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, what Israel was trying to do with these foreign agents was bomb civilians, targets like theaters, schools, hospitals, and then the investigation that followed would prove that it was Muslim Brotherhood agents who were governed by the doctrine of the Soviet Union. So the question here that I propose is who is behind this other than the state of Iran? Who is creating this? Why is there suddenly all of these modern weapons in a place that was relying on what I remember growing up as foot soldiers? So ponder that a little bit. And we are now sending our largest carrier strike group to the Mediterranean to support Israel. Something that we have done on and off for many years. Many remember the Iraq War. We had sent several of our carrier strike groups to the Gulf of Aden and to the coast of Saudi Arabia to reinforce a no-fly zone there. We did it several other instances. We sent our carrier strike groups to help in the Kosovo, the Bosnian War back in Clinton's administration to enforce a no-fly zone for NATO and the United Nations. But another question, strikingly, unsurprisingly, though, comes out of this. When is the United States going to stop meddling in foreign affairs where it, frankly, may or may not have any foreign involvement or necessity for foreign involvement? So, the question that I want to ask the viewers as this story is developing, when this war finally comes to an end, it might be a year from now, it might be tomorrow. After all, the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, have taken back the majority of it and are now going into the West Bank, and they're going after the ones in the Gaza Strip as well. But the two questions that I really want to see asked from both myself and the viewers is we need to have common sense foreign policy again. We can't just willy-nilly go giving $140 billion to an ally and say, we're backing him. That's the way we did it in the proxy wars in Korea and Vietnam, both of which, depends on who you ask, will be seen as a strategic retreat or will be hailed as an American victory. We just don't recognize it enough. I've talked to enough Vietnam veterans, I've talked to enough Korean War veterans to say that it was a U.S. victory, and far, far too many to say that it was a necessity to go over there to begin with. So we can't keep throwing Cold War politics at a modern progressing stage of war. We can't keep outspending our enemies like we did in the space race with Sputnik and the Soviet Union and expecting a different result other than now we are seeing the United States wasting its money. We're going bankrupt, which is what I believe Osama bin Laden had even said. The former tactic of the Al-Qaeda groups and several of these big guys came out and said that bankrupting America into a war that they could not finish was going to be the final tactic. So we are seeing America constantly bankrolling these wars abroad, and we see no land gain from it. It's time that we brought diplomacy back into it. It's time that America really starts sticking up for its allies. And I really do think it becomes with the competency of our administration. It comes with the competency of the American Congress, which for anybody who's seen the ousting for the first time, and I believe it's the only first or second time we've had this in American history, the ousting of Speaker Kevin McCarthy, which, think what you will about the man. Either way, we are having institutional crises like never before. Public faith is at an all-time low in both Congress, the Supreme Court, the president. Our nation is in a time of crisis where we have more than just Israel and Ukraine to worry about. How are we going to fight wars for the future, whether it be with communist China, Russia, or whoever is going to be our antagonist in this next war if we're not fighting for a fair budget, a good oversight of our budget? How are we supposed to fight wars when the DoD can't even pass a budget analysis audit? So these are really the big questions that we have to start asking ourselves. Can we really fight a war? Can we really be continue to hold the credibility that America has always had for our allies abroad? Whether that have been World War II, which the Lend-Lease was a big part of establishing our credibility. We essentially gave loans of military equipment to the United Kingdom, to France, to push forward the war effort, a two-front war, as it were. And we even gave B-29 bombers to the Soviet Union. Many may know, many may not know that there is an off-brand version from the Soviet Union of the American B-29 Superfortress. So we are seeing a time when Lend-Lease might become a big thing again. We're not necessarily giving a loan, but we are bringing our jobs back from overseas. We are bringing our corporative power back to manufacture weapons for our allies overseas under the guise of taking away the secret technology that the United States puts into its advanced combat vehicles. And we could be seeing Lend-Lease come back, like I said, with vessels, with tanks, with aircraft, with sort of the great value brand technology in them, still enabling our allies to fight a war, but we're not giving all of our war arsenal away to a country that most people can't find on a map. So, aside from that, what we really need to be asking, we don't even have the capacity. I think it was in Trump's administration, even 2017, when he got in the Congressional Research Office, actually did a data backed investigation into whether we could fight a two front war. And as the majority of those reports came out to establish, there is no way, no possible way, with even the best economy in the world, with the most money in the world, that we could ever fight a two front war at the present moment. Now, I believe all of this still stems back from poor budgeting, comes from poor policy making, and another thing, meddling in foreign affairs. When we look at how the situation in Iran has ever evolved into such a dictatorship, into such an oligarchy of really these religious fanatics that are in there, and there's no question about it. I do feel bad for the people in Iran because they are living under tyranny. They're living under oppression that is being pushed as the guise of Islamic extremism, when in actuality they're taking advantage of the Muslims in that country, posing as what I see as religious saviors of the Iranian Republic, or whatever they still call it over there, and they're using it to peddle their own agenda. It's no different than the fascists in Germany saying we're doing God's will and building a cathedral or two. Well, is it really God's will when you are killing millions of innocent people and building cathedrals to hide the shame of who is really in charge? And I'll tell you how the Ayatollah, I believe at this time it's begins with a K. I don't even know how to pronounce his last name right. Kamani, something like that. If you really want to look at how it started, it all begins in 1953 to 1954 with Operation Ajax. The CIA was headed by none other than Alan Dulles. His brother, many will remember them as the Dulles brothers. One was a Secretary of State, one was the director of the CIA, whose undersecretary's brother happened to be the mayor of Dallas at the time Kennedy was shot. So many coincidences. Well, before Kennedy ever came along, Alan Dulles had come to Eisenhower and said, "We're worried about Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh." Now, for those who don't know, Mohammad Mossadegh, the honorable Prime Minister of Iran, was the last democratically elected leader that Iran has had in the last almost 70 years now. So, what ended up happening was Mohammad Mossadegh was essentially nationalizing the oil industry, and the Anglo Iranian Oil Company in 1953 had come out and said, we can't have Iran taxing our oil exports, even though we have all this untapped oil that we can sell and make trillions of dollars off of in the next 50 years. We can't have somebody taxing it and then distributing it to government programs for hospitals and schools. So the Anglo Iranian Oil Company contacts Alan Dulles and the CIA and says, uh, Director Dulles, we have a concern that this guy is a communist. He's fulfilling Soviet plots. He's the next domino in the pyramid. So Alan Dulles puts together a thing with his brother, John Foster Dulles, in the State Department, and they essentially send a very misinforming memo to the president, Dwight D. Eisenhower at the time, and said, Mr. Eisenhower, the CIA needs a blank doctrine, a blank budget to go after this guy. He's got to get out. He's got to get taken out. Not killed, but he needs to be ousted from office. So they started funding Mujahideen groups. Had the first plan not fallen through in lockstep with the way that they had designed it, essentially the CIA had come through and blackmailed the guy and said, "You need to leave office, Mossadegh, or you're not going to have a very fun time." And so the Shah of Iran at that time, there was a Shah of Iran, the king of Iran. The guy says, "Well, you can't be doing that. We're a sovereign power. You can't provoke us like that." And so they told the Shah, unless he wanted to be ousted from being king by a coup, that he would allow Mossadegh to resign from the prime ministership, and Prime Minister Mossadegh would go on to stay at his house most of the rest of his life. So what happened after 54 in Operation Ajax was it was a success. They never had to use Mujahideen groups. What it ended up happening was Iran's leader stepped down. The Shah ended up being taken over in the 70s during the Iranian Revolution. And the Ayatollah had replaced the Shah and the prime minister as the supreme leader of Iran. So we must ask ourselves the problems that we're facing today with a regime that is so hate ridden with America. We have to understand that it was the United States who took out their last democratic elected leader. And if the people are living under a dictatorship without the right anymore, the right does not exist anymore to go vote and put in a new leader. They are so intimidated. They live in a country with no Second Amendment. They don't live with a Bill of Rights. There's essentially a vacuum of power in there that unless the military takes over, that the Ayatollah is not being removed. And so we are living in funny times. The 50s led to the Iranian Revolution because the Iranian people were tired of essentially living under a US puppet government, and they were tired of oil politics being brought in. And now they have a gentleman who is now using the advantage of religious scare tactics to say, I am placed here by God, I am this, I am that. Essentially the the Jesuit secret society equivalent of the the Muslim state of Iran. This guy's taking advantage of the religious beliefs there just as much as, we have had congressmen get in and say we are bringing in religious freedom like never before, and they get in there and they don't do anything except peddle their own agenda. So stupid is as stupid does. Stupid goes where stupid comes. So we have a problem in Iran because we have a problem with how our own government works. And as people are prone to taking advantage of revolutions, the 70s Iranian Revolution was no different. So I wonder if the United States had never ousted Mossadegh, would it have been a communist puppet of Russia? Or quite possibly, had the U.S. never intervened and got rid of their last elected prime minister, would we have ever seen the Shah being ousted and the Ayatollah come into power, and now seeing the hatred in the region for the state of Israel? So these are all questions that we need to ask that are imperative for our future policy with Iran, the future policy between Israel and the Gaza, the West Bank, the Palestinians. And I am a Christian who supports Israel wholeheartedly. But I have Muslim friends, I have Christian friends that disagree with everything that America's foreign policy has been in the last 70 years. I have people that are Jewish, that are Christian, that disagree with Israel's foreign policy. Ones that disagree with Iran's foreign policy. But can we really expect a government who our government had ousted their last democratically elected leader? Think about it this way. If Iran or whoever or Russia had come in and installed somebody in the US government, we would be bound to react violently at some point because just like King George, we're tired of being ruled by somebody else. So we need to find a way that we can support Israel wholeheartedly without jeopardizing what could be a relationship in the region, what could build growth instead of continuously fighting these wars that we never pull out of, bankrolling things that we will never get our money back on, and supporting partisan led plans with, frankly, two Dulles brothers who wanted the name recognition, wanted to be, these big name brand Ivy Leaguers who get their name in a textbook. We don't need those types of people running our foreign policy anymore. It's time that we put in people that want to build friendships, that want to stand up to America's enemies, that want to stand up for our allies, that want to create policies that don't involve us bankrupting the future of our country and leaving the mess of a debt, of a deficit to our grandchildren. So I don't have any solutions at the moment. It's something that we are seeing progress right before our eyes. It's very hard to come up with solutions as we are seeing something, frankly, for the first time in American history, in the first time in world history, we are seeing a state superpower in the region, a regional power, essentially peddling stuff under our noses to these groups that are now attacking Israel. And I do want to put out there that I am praying for Israel, that I stand with Israel, but I also stand for better policy, better backing, better assistance for our allies that don't jeopardize the security of both of our trusts, our financial agreements, and world trade. Essentially, war disrupts every one of these things. And if we are not careful, it will destroy us just like it destroyed Rome. So stick with us. We're going to be discussing vaccination acceptance and a few articles that had come out during the pandemic that I think are important. God bless you and stay with us.
Have you ever met a single person in your life that enjoys paying taxes? No, no one does. If you can't sleep at night because you have a huge problem with the IRS, I've got some free advice for you. This service is strictly limited to individuals that owe the IRS $10,000 or more in back taxes. And if you qualify, we can guarantee that you won't be writing a big fat check to the IRS, or our services cost you nothing. The first 100 people that call today will get a free tax consultation worth $500. Stop worrying about your IRS problem. We can help you, we promise. Call the tax doctor right now. I mean right now, to learn more.
800-240-4587. 800-240-4587. 800-240-4587. That's 800-240-4587.
Fast Track Student Loans can get your student loans out of default, stop any wage garnishments, stop collection calls, and stop seizure of your tax refund. Give yourself a break. Stop the stress and get your student loan payments down to as little as $25 a month based on what you can afford to pay. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. Fast Track Student Loans can get your student loans out of default, stop any wage garnishments, stop collection calls, and stop seizure of your tax refund. Give yourself a break. Stop the stress and get your student loan payments down to as little as $25 a month based on what you can afford to pay. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395.
You're listening to Joco Community Radio.
Good afternoon, Johnson County. We're back with the second half of the Let Freedom Ring program for today. First, we'd like to say that Joco Community Radio is proud to be the voice of Johnson County, Texas, and is live 24/7 on the TuneIn Radio Network. TuneInJoco.com is the place to find all the best ways to listen and watch. The station app is also available for free. I recommend it. It's very handy. Comes in handy. You can look by program. Just check out the lineup and more at jococommunityradio.com. This episode more brought to you by Next Level Claims, making your insurance work for you. Reach out to your local Texas sales rep at 844-839-4245. That's 844-839-4245. Be sure to dress your arms and more at thetiffy.com. Would also like to give a shout out to the Burleson HTO. I have yet to get the email if you would like to sponsor the show. I had the blueberry green tea again. I had raspberry yesterday, so it was a nice change of pace. Sometimes your taste buds get worn out a little bit, and there's nothing refreshing even in this wonderful fall weather than a Southern classic. Right now, we're looking at the vaccination acceptance article that I had come across in one of my classes. We discussed this at the university, a cultural translation globalization class. It's very interesting stuff when you start looking at why things happen, why people believe the way that they do, and how this impacts public health, how this impacts the propagation of government agendas, how the government targets key minority groups, keys in specific religious groups, specific socioeconomic ideological beliefs. to basically push a public health agenda. And believe me, I'm not for or against vaccines. I think some of them are wonderful to help. Jonas Salk in the 1950s essentially eradicated polio, and we still use polio vaccines to this day. Measles, mumps, all these things have been eradicated because of vaccines. But I'm not for a program that essentially replaces all of 5,000 years of Western medicine and science and technological developments because all of a sudden herd immunity through contagion and transmission no longer exists. That was revised in the first year of the COVID pandemic and something that I have held against the World Health Organization ever since because historically you ask any doctor there was two different ways of having herd immunity. You could develop it through inoculation and getting sick and having the antibodies in your blood remember the virus, or you can develop the antibodies naturally through transmitting and getting uh, contracting the virus. I'm not sure about all of the fancy health terms, but the article that we're looking at right now came through the American Marketing Association. It's published through the SAGE articles. It's called Vaccination Acceptance Across Cultures: The Roles of Collectivism, Empathy, and Homophily by James Leonard and Todd Pizzuti. So essentially, what this study was to see whether collectivism, the belief in a group over the individual, empathy, understanding and feeling for somebody's situation, and homophily, essentially how alike two people in a group are, that would encourage them to go and get a vaccine. So I'm just going to read through this real quick, a few parts that I've highlighted. For vaccines to be effective in defending against highly contagious diseases such as COVID-19, a sufficient proportion of the population needs to be willing to accept inoculation to develop herd immunity. Notice how they don't use the traditional second method of contracting the disease and then creating antibodies, transmitting it to other people, and allowing our immune systems that God had created in His infinite wisdom to go to work and whoop butt and take names. So I think it's interesting we only mention one thing in these articles now. Drawing on cultural dimensions theory, we assess whether the cultural dimensions of collectivism or groupism affect the public's acceptance of COVID-19 vaccination. Collectivism reflects the differences in how people view themselves in relation to others and is recognized as the most prominent cultural dimension. Collectivistic people essentially have a higher tendency to go for group efforts and group collectives than isolating themselves, or the American equivalent, individualism, what this country was founded on. Now, mind you, that we are still a bit of a collectivistic culture, but the Americans have far outweighed in excess the individualistic aspect than the egalitarian ideology of collectivism. We value the work, we value a meritocracy, we value individual values, individual rights, individual liberties in this country. Now, collectivism is a dangerous approach, I want to say, for one reason: that is leaders like we were discussing in the last segment, like the Ayatollah in the 70s, took advantage of the revolution, a collectivist revolution, to impose power on himself. Just like Vladimir Lenin and Joseph Stalin, Trotsky, Engels had in Russia in the Russian Revolution. It makes it very easy in a collectivistic culture for people to undermine the majority of the population and insert themselves as tyrants, insert themselves as rulers. And what we are seeing is nothing short of a, what I would say is a reprogramming of American culture to essentially welcome collectivism, to essentially eradicate the individual. What uh this term people describe New World Order, whether that be a global government, whether you believe in that or not. I believe whether it does come as a global government, whether it doesn't, there is a vast program to undermine in every country that the West has had the philosophy of individualism. We are seeing a new world doctrine being implemented that essentially gets rid of the individual. They don't want you to be able to access things that they don't see as fact checkable. They don't want you to access a house. They don't want you to access the internet, anything, unless you have a subscription basis, which many of them have said this is how it's going to evolve. So the discussion that they had done on the study of collectivism is that they had found that it does have a positive relationship with encouraging people to get vaccines. It is known to vary both between and within countries, and our results suggest that within a given country, individual differences in the endorsement of collective values predict vaccination acceptance. So, we're going to get into what all of this means at the end here, and I'm just going to briefly go through the discussions where they discuss the results of these studies. They said that empathy, essentially feeling for others, many remember the vaccination videos that were put out. They're still being put out for COVID. Little Billy couldn't go to school because he got sick. Well, he wouldn't have gotten sick had everybody in his house got a vaccine. Then everybody went out and got a vaccine. So, empathy is essentially feeling bad for another person's situation and using that to reinforce a public agenda. Now, they said the same thing about homophily, that when somebody sees somebody just like them, think about it this way: when you have the working class guys on a commercial, on the Ford commercials, I believe was one good example. One of them came out, I think, during the last Super Bowl, or it came out during this new NFL season, and it had all the electric vehicles and stuff, and it said, "We're driving America," and then it shows the blue collar people doing their thing. Essentially, what the CDC in this, they would infer from the study, is that the CDC would use blue collar guys to tell other blue collar guys to go out and get a vaccine, and that they said that this has a positive result with that. They said that because different socioeconomic beliefs exist, they have to market it different ways. And there's no better way than buying the data from third party systems that track your keystrokes, that type what you type in Amazon, what you watch on Netflix. All this stuff gets put into a big database, and we talk about why this is such a big deal. I guarantee you the government buys all of that data up and says, well, I wonder how we can market our public health initiatives and all these things towards American consumers. So we get to the managerial and public policy implication section at the end of this article, and it says it addresses a central question facing marketing and public policy efforts: how to encourage worldwide acceptance of vaccines. Vaccination rates have been steadily decreasing in some countries, including the United States, and without sufficient vaccination rates across countries, this pandemic will persist longer than anticipated. Now, here's the problem I have with peddling one way of doing things. If we are no longer accepting the duality of herd immunity, and it's only coming from inoculation, you are essentially brainwashing people in this generation and the next to say that the only way that we can do this is to buy into our tax dollars being spent to give us God knows what. And we have all of these side effects that came out. And I'm not even speaking from conspiracy. I believe what I had seen was a 17-page, single spaced uh, list of the side effects that were known from the several COVID drugs that were put out. So what we're seeing here is essentially these articles are being put into use to this day. I've got snapshots. I figured I would screenshot them because there's no way that this is ever going to happen again. In the mass planning that went through with this again, it's not something that we are going to wake up tomorrow and realize, shoot, that actually happened. It was actually propagated to me. The next time it won't be such a shock. So I snapshot a few things from Snapchat that they had put out, ads, go get vaccinated, this and that. You go back to 2020 on my phone, you'll see the screenshots of the CDC emblem, the Department of Health and Public Services logo on it, people getting shots in their arms, the Band-Aid being put over. And we get into why does all this happen? So I bet you're wondering, why do they create these commercials the way that they do? Well, then they come into the promotional efforts section of this article and tell you actually how they recommend people get vaccinated, what works. Subtle linguistic strategies, for example, using pronouns such as we and us instead of I and they, could promote an interdependent mindset among otherwise individualistic consumers. So, changing the way consumers think by repeatedly telling them, we, us, it's we are all in this together. Save us, save our citizens, save little Johnny across the street, save so and so down the block. Essentially, we are re-engineering the way that Americans think through consumer marketing to push this gigantic vaccination uh, system. And this is not even a conspiracy. This is simple psychological sociology. When you repeatedly tell Americans, you re-engineer the way that they believe society occurs. Many remember Jean-Jacques Rousseau, John Locke. Many of these people came up with the theory of the social contract. The people signed up to get certain rights protected by the government, and it gave the government a limited number of rights of things that they could do. And this was how society it has been created ever since in the American country. We have the system that is based on individual protection, individual liberties, and the government is limited in its power. Now you have these constitutional reconstructionists, I'll call them, that come in and use that to their advantage. They say, well, because we're protecting the individual rights, but they don't pitch it from this way. It's the groups, the collective's rights. The collective has a right to such and such. Instead of now we are looking at the individualistic aspect, let's look at this in terms of gun violence. When we start talking about the mass shootings that happen and people start looking at the individual's right to own a firearm, the Constitution and the framers' intent was that everybody was able to defend themselves with the right to bear arms. The collectivists would take this approach and say, well, the collective is given this right to defend the country, to defend all of these essentially state backed concepts. And when we look into how this happens, it's mostly because, like the communists in Russia, they get up and say, we, us. It's never the individual. You never saw propaganda from the Soviet Union that said, uh, Boris Yeltsin did this. The gentleman who went into space and orbited the Earth for the Yuri Gagarin. You never saw Yuri's picture on there and says, Yuri did this. Yuri went and orbited the Earth. You never see the cosmonauts except their face on these propaganda posters, and it says, the Soviet Union orbits the Earth. The Soviet Union does this. A collectivistic approach inherently is anti meritocracy, it's anti individualistic. But this is how the propagation begins. And from that interdependent mindset, it goes on to say campaigns could also foster empathy using storytelling and the portrayal of an identifiable victim. So telling old people, unless you want to go see your grandkids for Thanksgiving, go get a vaccine. And or they bring up the classic video. Mother and father, kids sitting around the dining table at Thanksgiving. It says, so and so couldn't make it this year. They got sick. Go out and get vaccinated. Help protect your elders. Now, I'm not anti vax. Like I said before, what I am against is the government using my family, the government using my grandmother, my government using my individual rights to twist the meaning of what rights mean, and then forcing a collectivist agenda on me because, as everybody knows, what one person does in this country affects another. Now, I'm all for the approach that the betterment and changes that somebody makes in their life impacts their community. Do I believe that our country was created, however, on the aspect of everybody being this interdependent country? No, I don't. If you really look if you really look at places like Jamestown in the 1607, 1600s, when this country first started, sure, we had interdependent families, but it was not somebody was relying on so and so for every aspect of their life. We had subsistence farming where families grew food for their families, they grew enough for themselves. But because we didn't have a government, this is where the nationalization project comes in of the Department of Education and all of these other systems that are implemented later is not because of collectivism, but because of out of the necessity of a growing country, we have to now have interdependent government, not interdependent masses. A interdependent government is part of the federal system designed by the Constitution. However, me giving up my rights because Joe Cool down the street doesn't like, the way that I live my life does not necessitate me giving up my rights for the betterment of Joe Cool because Joe Cool doesn't like what I do. Well, now, what do I get out of that? Joe Cool gets me changing my lifestyle so that I can give up my rights so that he has a little bit more of security. Now, last time I checked, there was a quote about this. Those who are willing to give up civil liberties in repayment for security deserve neither and lose both. I believe that's how it went. You might have to correct me on that a little bit, but it's something very similar to that. Essentially, to boil it down, people who give up their liberties for security gain nothing out of it. They lose their individuality. They lose their ability to voice their opinion. Just like what we saw in the Alien and Sedition Acts in the 1800s. We were in the middle of a war, and President John Adams came out and said, well, if you're going to criticize the government, if you're going to do this, then we might as well take away that ability for people to do that. We saw it come out with yellow journalism, with Spain sunk the Maine. Anybody who was not on board with that must have been with the enemy. And you see these mass war efforts play out. It's just like the internment camps with the Japanese. If you are not for taking away Japanese Americans' rights and putting them in internment camps because one out of every 100,000 or every one out of a million of them is a spy, then you must be part of the problem. You must be part of the enemy. And we've seen these boogeymen come out of everywhere. Now, sure, that comes in from the same aspect as McCarthyism. I'm a big McCarthyist. I believe that communists have infiltrated this government. I believe that they are still in the government. If that's not evident at this point, then I don't know what to tell you. But there is always the other aspect of getting innocent Americans brought in by something like HUAC in the future, but instead of HUAC, it's the House Committee on Injustice. And now we have innocent Americans being brought in and said, well, you didn't want to bake a cake because you didn't agree with this person and their marriage choice. You didn't want to accept this religion. You didn't want to accept climate change as a fact. So now we're bringing you in on treason charges because you don't agree with what the government does. That's always a door that's open. But it doesn't have to come out of McCarthyism, which is where I think people get off wrong. This ideology, collectivism, this ideology of government agendas coming before the individual and the rights in this country can come from even the best places. It can come from somebody posing as a Christian, getting up and saying, well, Joe Cool is not accepting this doctrine of Christianity, and completely miscue the Bible, miscue whatever religion it is, and say, well, now we need a program that brings in people and charges them with these offenses, which they tried that in California and they tried it in New York, charging people who were overbooking Bible studies. They tried that in California and New York, where they were finding people for going to the beach without a mask on. You're on the beach surfing by yourself. There ain't nobody here. I guarantee everybody's seen that picture of the one surfer out on the beach. There's nobody there in the middle of COVID 2020. The guy's out there surfing on some waves. The cops come up and fine him like $500 for being on the beach. We're seeing this agenda of a new world order. It doesn't have to be a global government. It simply has to be taking away the rights of the individual, forcing people to be interdependent in the sense that society cannot prosper unless we give up our ability to provide for ourselves for the greater good of the commons. And what we're seeing now is that communistic mindset come out, which is where the word communism came from. Commune, the good of the commune, the good of the state rather than the good of the individual, the defending of individual rights. So they say inducing empathy directly has also been shown to increase pro-social behaviors. Then it says there may be additional mechanisms by which collectivism affects vaccination acceptance of pro-social behavior. Future research could uncover additional psychological processes connecting collectivism to acceptance and pro-social behavior in general. The endorsement of collectivistic values, for instance, might encourage vaccination acceptance through the desire to return to collective routines, which help maintain social harmony and tradition. Essentially, you take away the right for the American people to live the way that they want. You take away the restaurants. You take away the right to go shopping. You take away the right to go to church. You take away the right to enjoy Bible study with Mr. and Mrs. Jones that night. You take away the rights for children to go to school. You dehumanize people. You put them into this category of you are not socially valuable unless you are willing to submit to a collectivistic mindset. Either you go out and get a vaccine or things don't return to normal. And that's what this is that I took out of this article is we are now seeing cultural engineering play a part in a greater, more strange look at what the word normal means. We're seeing people be reprogrammed. We're seeing people become re-engineered in the way that they think to no longer think of themselves. It's always, I think of this person. I do this for this person. I do. Now, that might be good and all for a small business, but on a national scale, those businesses also have to rely on themselves. A person who works at a supermarket does not have to depend on Joe Cool down the street to go in and make minimum wage and then depend on somebody else to provide his home, provide this, provide that. It does away with what the American dream has always been. When we take away the right to own personal property, we take away the right to express religion, express redresses of government. When we take away the ability to protest because someone's not wearing a mask, it to me, it's no longer about whether you wear a mask or you don't. It's about whether you follow the rules or not, whether you become a accustomed to this doctrine or not. Now, I'm not saying that you can't wear a mask still. I'm not saying that you can't get vaccinated still. I'm not saying that it doesn't work. What I'm saying is that I have a problem with people who use cultural studies and social engineering to redesign the way that the human brain instinctively thinks. Thinking about the collective never came about until agrarian lifestyle started. And that only occurred because we had to engineer a system that would sustain a growing population. There's nothing inherently communistic about that. There's nothing communist about creating a system that sustains a population, as we saw in the yeoman farmer age of this country. There's nothing communistic about creating a program that allows people to adapt to the necessity of a growing government. We have a growing population, which means we have more responsibilities. But those responsibilities stem down to individuals in a job who earn their wage, who get out and send their kids to public school so that they can provide for their property, so that they can provide for their home, so that they can provide for a marriage, so that their kids can go to school. It's no longer about the individual, though. What we're seeing is the use of individualism, hyperactive individualism, transitioning us to a collective society. I hope that makes sense for you because it's coming in the near future. We're seeing the groundwork, the framework being put up. The scaffolding is going to be taken down someday, and I don't think that is a society that we want our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren to live in. So join us Thursday. We'll be going over a few things. Hopefully, we'll be going over this John Hopkins article that's pretty interesting. The plan for the next big pandemic. So join us Thursday. God bless you. God bless Texas. And God bless the United States of America. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.
From Burleson to Venus and Grandview to Godly, this is the voice of Johnson County, Joco Community Radio.
Why have thousands of aspiring authors teamed up with Christian Faith Publishing to publish their book? Because Christian Faith Publishing is an author-friendly publisher who understands that your labor is more than just a book. We provide authors freedom and flexibility throughout the publishing process. Professional